Welcome to the PlayAbly podcast. This episode is brought to you by PlayAbly Ads, where we turn your marketing into an interactive, game-based experience that engages customers and boosts conversions. And here's something special. Mention this podcast when you book a free demo on our website, and you'll get your first month free. Visit playably.ai to learn more and schedule your demo. Welcome back to the next episode of the PlayAbly podcast. You guys are in for a special treat today. Joining me is PlayAbly founder and CEO, John Chang. John, can you introduce yourself and your background a little bit so people get to know you?
Hey, everybody, excited to be here. PlayAbly is not just a company for us, but a team and family that's worked together for many years across many different companies. Our team and our background actually comes from the gaming space, a company called Unity, where I ran machine learning and AI, and where we built games and an ad platform that were specific to game developers. And we have taken everything we've learned there, our engineering team, our design team, and our know-how, and we're taking that and applying that to e-commerce, applying that to brands to help them to grow with novel, exciting new ways to engage their audiences, just like game developers do. And we're really excited with everything that we're building for you guys.
Thanks, John. And today we are talking about site migration. I think we've seen a trend of a lot of the clients that we work with and a lot of other companies that we're talking to making the move from WooCommerce, making the move from Press over to Shopify. And these are existing brands that are doing $50,000 a day, $100,000 a day in sales, and don't want to lose what they've already built up, don't want to have the customers have a bad experience. And we've heard some horror stories and experienced some horror stories. So that is what we're talking about today. John, what are the biggest mistakes that e-commerce makes when doing Shopify migration?
Yeah, unfortunately, we have seen this happen more often than not, which is we get brought into brands who have a brand new Shopify site or in the middle of a migration, and they just realize that the conversion rate has dropped off a cliff, or that checkout isn't working, or that the load times are actually double what they were with the old site. And in a panic, they're looking to roll back to what they had before, even though they spent 50, 75, $100,000 on the migration, because fundamentally the work that was done didn't take into account that what's happening is you have an operating business, right? You are in a position, as you're saying, where you're driving substantial sales, people are interacting with your site. And so what you're doing is trying to change the wheels, change the tires on a car that is currently driving. And you can't do that piecemeal. You can't do that without a fully formed plan. You can't do that in a way that doesn't account for the fact that there are live experiences going on 24/7, and anything you do could affect that and could affect, your bottom line in a way that's really painful. So the biggest mistakes we see quite simply are that these projects are done in a haphazard manner without planning for things like QA, without planning for things like code backup and release patterns, and frankly, aren't done on an iterative way, in an iterative process without the testing ahead of time. So maybe we'll have a chance to talk about like best practices when it comes to some of the data things that we'd like to see happen, but just from a fundamental technical perspective, we have to plan how the code is going to move, what pieces are going to move, and in what order, and how they're going to be tested for months before you actually write a line of code in Shopify, right? So that's what we see that doesn't happen. We see firms come in and promise that they will move a site over in 3 weeks from end to end, and we look at that and we're just like, that is impossible, because you have a business that, with a certain degree of uptime that needs to happen. And we come from the gaming space, like I mentioned, where these games are live operations, and they're driving millions of dollars in sales a day. And the amount of planning and execution needs to happen to do some of these port migrations. It's a much bigger endeavor than I think a lot of the founders we talk to and work with are aware of before it happens.
And I think we've seen it too, where companies come in and give a quote of 3 weeks, as you said, 2 weeks, even a month, and haven't even seen the inside of their site yet, haven't even gotten access to see how the site is set up. Because I know we've gotten into some customers' websites where we're like, oh my gosh, there's 100 plugins here. There's all these things that are built on top of each other. And to just detangle that aspect of it before being able to give a quote, whether it's monetarily or time wise, should be a red flag, but I think it isn't for a lot of people. They hear 3 weeks or see a low number that they can afford and then want to go ahead with it. Who should e-commerce owners look to do these types of migrations?
It's hard, right? Because one of the things that attracts most founders to Shopify is the fact that it is low code, right? The fact that you can get a lot done without having to write a lot of code. Coming from a Magento or a WordPress or something like that, where you have a lot of code that you potentially had to deal with in the past, looking for engineering teams that have experience with code, but with a Shopify background, that's pretty rare. So what you want to do is evaluate the questions that they're asking you to your point, Kajal, about what your site currently looks at, right? So if they don't have a 3 to 5 page questionnaire about your business, about your site, about the technology behind it, about the plugins, they're probably flying by night, right? They're going to be surprised 2 weeks into the project when, as you said, there's 15 plugins just for the checkout process because you have a specific fulfillment partner or because you have a specific API that you tap into. And that's going to not only extend the amount of time that it's going to require for the transition, but they're also going to miss things, right? They're also not going to be able to transfer over critical business functionality that you're going to figure out a month, 2 months later after the launch that isn't there anymore when for some reason this product fulfillment or this pin is not being fulfilled. You're going to get a lot of nasty surprises, right? So the three things I would look for is number one, you've got to get references. You've got to see sophisticated sites that they've moved, what the starting project was and what the end product was. Number two, think about and look at the questions they're asking you, how sophisticated they are. Does that show the experience that they're doing? And number three, I would dive into that plan specific along 2 points. One of which is what is their QA process? What is the QA for the new build that they're going to ask for? And number two, what is their launch plan? Are they going to light this thing up 3 weeks from now and suddenly you're going to move over to this new site and all is going to be well? Or do they have an iterative process where they're going to test pieces of the site with parts of your traffic? Are they going to move over the most visited pages in a systematic manner? Are they going to iterate those pages in a way that makes sense before there is a hard launch date several weeks down the line? Is that a system that they've developed, or have they actually never done this in a way that actually makes sense? And to be honest, I think 99% of the projects we see don't have any of those things.
Yeah, I know that one of our clients actually left and then came back to us. Was one of these people who had one of these issues? The GitHub. How important is GitHub?
GitHub is GitLab. It's source control is fundamental to software development. And if you're not experienced or haven't developed a lot of software, you might think of it as a nice to have, whereas we think of it as mission critical. So GitHub is just so you know, source control is the ability to capture versions of your site or capture versions of the code that not only track what changes have been made, but allow you to roll back to a previous version if, God forbid, something goes wrong with a site that you've launched. So as most Shopify does not have this natively built into it, but if you're running $1 million, $10 million, $500 million business, like this is table stakes. And the example I think you're referring to was a brand that wanted to save some money Someone came in, made a bunch of promises about what they could do and how they're going to do it. Promised a month, 3 months in, they finally get something launched, and lo and behold, they figured out it was performing worse than not only the previous site, but the load times and the conversion rate were down significantly. So they said, "Oh, we got to do something. We're going to miss our quarter's numbers. Let's just go back to the old site." Number one, they didn't have the code stored. Number two, the theme had changed in terms of what that old site was built on. And so they're caught between a rock and a hard place in not being able to do either one. And so in a panic, they called us up and called, can we actually do the project that we want to do? It actually made it 10 times worse in that they had this now spaghetti code built site that was worse than their original site. But now that we had to untangle all that, took twice as long, frankly cost twice as more. Eventually, we got them to a place where, yeah, the promises of the Shopify platform were able to be unlocked, but it wasn't the walk in the park that they had been promised and that we had warned them about.
And I know during that migration as well, they had lost a lot of the SEO clout that they had built up,
Mm-hmm.
that their SEO guy
Yeah,
had built up for them. Just it wasn't something that was thought about over in the migration, the
yeah,
thoughtfulness. And so their rankings went down. And in a highly competitive space in which they were, of like household cleaning items, there was direct competition, and
yeah.
they at once were the giants there, and now we've seen them drop. So I think it's important to have somebody who really understands all of the technical parts of the site.
Yeah, and I think SEO is a great example of that because you know the engines don't crawl every day, and the algorithms don't take into account information. It's that goodwill that you've built up over the lifetime of your business. If you are to lose that, you might not ever get back to that same place that you were at before. And you'll see that the organic piece of your business informed the success of your paid and every other marketing strategy that you had. And so if you don't think about the keyword structure, if you don't think about the backlinks, if you don't have those planned in the new Shopify theme in a way that carries that over, yeah, you're destroying parts of your business that you've worked so hard to build. That doesn't have to happen, right? Like when we account for it ahead of time. In fact, you can do better with SEO on the new Shopify site because you have a higher quality ranking, because your load times will be faster. All of that is the promise. You just have to think about and account for it ahead of time rather than trying to pick up the pieces later when the body blow to your business, it could be something hard to recover from.
And I think a lot of people also think of it as a set time. It's 3 months and then they'll launch and they'll be done. But how important is it to have a plan for ongoing support, optimization, and QA after migrating?
Yeah, I would look at it in two ways, right? Like one of which is the decision to migrate is an opportunity to not just move over your existing site, but to refine it and to better understand who you're moving it for. Like we are big proponents of really understanding your personas and how they interact with data and what the information architecture needs to be so that we do all that user testing ahead of time so that we can design a better site for them on Shopify. Conversely, after launch, that is the time where you then measure how those personas are actually interacting with the site. How are they getting the information that they need? Are the images attracting the attention that we wanted? So setting metrics ahead of time about what the performance should look like, having a plan to look at the heat maps of what people are doing on the site, and to have constant monitoring of that because obviously that changes over time as your traffic changes and as shopping behavior and macroeconomics change. So the iterative process for us, let's say it takes 3 months to transition a site. The 3 months after that are not only the most critical time in terms of ensuring performance, but they're also the biggest opportunity to take a step up with your business in terms of refining what we've now built and really being able to speak one to one to these different personas in a way where maybe you have middle-aged women in the Midwest as one persona type, and they want to see images and graphics in a certain way, but then being also able to serve an audience, a younger audience with that same website, with that same Shopify store, such that both audiences are not only accounted for, but feel like they have a home with your brand, right? And I
Like it's
think that's
personalized for them.
exactly, and it's that the earlier point is an iterative process, right? No one knows human behavior until we see it in the wild, until we see it tested. And I think that's the most exciting opportunity for us with our brands is that iterative process after we've moved on to Shopify, have the basics knocked out, have the infrastructure in place, have the SEO tight, then to iterate that site for those different personas is where we see that 2 to 3x increase that we're all targeting.
So I think we've talked about a whole ton of points here. If there was one piece of advice that you could give to someone about to start a Shopify migration or even thinking about it, what would that be?
Yeah, I think the number one thing that you want to do is to make sure that you have a fully thought out plan that really decomposes your business in a thoughtful manner from a technology perspective and to lay out how, like we talked about, how you're going to not only transition that technology to Shopify, but also how you're going to test and iterate it. And if you're not capable of putting together that plan because you've never done it before, you don't have the engineering team to come up with that plan, is to make sure you find a partner who understands these key tenets and is able to work with you on that, right? The one piece of advice I would have is don't underestimate, don't shortchange how important of a move this is. And to be very clear, we are in 90% of the opportunities, we are very supportive and think and believe that moving to Shopify for many of the brands that we come across makes a ton of sense. Absolutely, you should do it. You just had to do it in a thoughtful manner. You just had to do it with an experienced partner. And you just have to understand the magnitude of the change, right? It's like picking up your store and plopping it in a brand new location, a brand new building with nothing built out yet. And that just doesn't happen instantly overnight. And if people are making you promises that sound too good to be true, I just encourage you to diligence that because it is your lifeblood. It is your business. And if it sounds too easy, maybe get a second opinion.
Thank you, John, for joining us today. Really appreciate it. And we'll catch you next time on the PlayAbly podcast.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for tuning in to the PlayAbly podcast. Ready to engage your customers like never before? PlayAbly turns your website into an interactive experience that drives results. Don't forget, mention the podcast during your free demo and get your first month free. Book now at playably.ai.